weathers, politics.
Nobody's ambition is what the blood.
I have fought a very family.
Natural occurrence, war, and the world economy.
I belong to everybody, and I belong to nobody.
ATN covers it all on ATN Politics today.
From the line across the ocean to the land beyond the mountains, through the Sahara, we bring on-spot news, live analysis, expert discussions on trending stories in politics, business, socio-economy, sports, and documentaries. So
This is the international news on Atlantic Television Network. First, the headlines. Rwanda, War Crimes Tribunal accounts for fugitives. Jordan, suspected Iranian-led plot to smuggle weapons into U.S. foiled. Asia, Singapore to inaugurate Lawrence Wong as new Prime Minister. Europe, Georgia's parliament passes final reading of Foreign Agents Bill. United States, President Biden, Trump tied in November presidential election race. Australia, young indigenous man drowns in stolen car evading police. The War Crimes Tribunal for Rwanda has accounted for the last remaining fugitives indicted for genocide, bringing to an end the court's 29-year mission to deliver justice for the 1994 slaughter that killed more than 800,000 Rwandans. The historic moment passed without drama, not with an arrest or the exhumation of a body, but in a video conference on the 30th April between the tribunal's prosecutor, Serge Bramed, and the two leaders of its fugitive tracking team dedicated to resolving the cold cases left in the wake of the genocide. At some point in that conversation, the three agreed they had finally accumulated enough evidence to satisfy the court that the last two suspects they had been tracking were long dead and were lying in unmarked graves in different corners of Central Africa. Those two final names crossed off the tribunal's list of 92 indictees were Charles Sikubwabo, and a restaurateur known by just one name, Ryandi Kayo. They were influential local organizers in Rwanda, Kibuye Prefecture, leading mobs of the Modera's Interahamwe Hutu militia responsible for the mass killing of Tutsis. Both had been charged with genocide and crimes against humanity. This is a tangible demonstration that the international community can ensure accountability is achieved no matter how long it takes. Bramed said, closing their cases does not simply mark the completion of the tribunal's work, it is also the culmination of a broader experiment in international justice of its sister court, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. The International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda was created 2 years later. Both were ad hoc courts given mandates by the UN Security Council and both proved tenacious and successful beyond all expectations. The ICTY accounted for all its 161 indictees by 2011. As they approached the end of their missions, the tribunals were folded into one, the awkwardly named International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, first established in 2010 to handle outstanding court hearings and to pursue the last fugitives. The striking effectiveness of the twin tribunals had fueled optimism and pushed back, and the momentum they created led to the establishment in 2002 of a permanent institution to investigate and judge war crimes, the International Criminal Court. The ICC has struggled, however. Unlike the two ad hoc courts, it does not have the backing of the US, Russia or China, and it has focused until recently on African cases. The court is facing a critical test as it weighs charges and arrest warrants for Israeli and Hamas leaders in the midst of the Gaza war and under heavy political pressure from all sides. After Bremertz was made prosecutor of the residual mechanism in 2016, he brought with him key members of the tracking team that had helped hunt Bosnian war criminals like Radovan Karadzic and Ratko Mladic to train their skills on the pursuit of the last 8 Rwandan suspects still at large. They got rid of a network of paid informants who were providing a constant drip feed of false leads and reviewed their files on the fugitives virtually from scratch, delving deep into the minutiae of witness interviews and open source data. Starting from the minute their feet left the Rwandan border in 1994, it is about source exploitation and investigation and witness interviewing until we got to the last piece of the puzzle, said Ewan Brown, a former British Army officer who is a leader of the tracking team. Discriminatory family laws across parts of Africa are stalling progress on women's rights in some countries, according to new research. The human rights organization Equality now studied family law and practices in 20 African countries and found progress in recent decades, but said inequalities persisted in marriage, divorce, child custody and inheritance and property laws. The report pointed to issues with pluralistic legal systems where statutory legislation sits alongside customary and religious laws and can make interpretation and application difficult. The majority of countries have ratified 2 protocols that guarantee strong rights and protection for women, including the Protocol to the African Charter on the Rights of Women in Africa and the UN's Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. However, in some countries, as in other parts of the world, rape is not outlawed in marriage. In others, women are unable to petition for divorce and have no guarantee of inheriting property on the death of a partner. In nations including Algeria, Cameroon, and Nigeria, women receive less inheritance than men. Those advocating for change say that family laws have not kept up with the social shifts of the times, including changes in family responsibilities and increased divorce rates. There has been some success across the continent, including raising the legal age for marriage to 18, said the report. Countries including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Kenya and Mozambique have banned child marriage. However, Cameroon, Senegal and Tanzania still allow it. Countries such as Nigeria outlawed child marriage in 2003, but the practice continues in the north of the country, where approximately 50% of girls are married before the age of 18. Esther Waberu, report co-author and a senior legal advisor at Equality, now said culture and religion frequently act as major impediments in the struggle for family law equality, stalling reforms, clawback clauses, water down the full impact of some progressive laws, and we are now witnessing backlash from anti-rights movements seeking to reverse hard-won gains made in ending harmful practices such as child marriage and female genital mutilation. Stagnation is also a problem, with governments pledging to reform discriminatory laws but failing to take meaningful action. In some instances, progressive family codes have remained in limbo for decades, awaiting enactment. On top of their inhabitants, we know of many families being trapped inside their homes, said Abu Jihad, a resident of the camp who gave a nickname fearing reprisals. The Israeli military said it had begun an operation overnight against terrorist operatives and infrastructure in the center of Jabalia. Over the past day, IDF troops in the area have engaged in intense battles with dozens of terrorist cells and eliminated a large number of terrorists, a statement said, including some of it said had fired towards the Israeli city of Sderot on Tuesday. Gaza's Civil Emergency Service and Health Ministry said rescue teams have been unable to reach areas where the army was operating to respond to calls for help. Abu Jihad said the militants were putting up a fierce fight. Our fighters are teaching painful lessons. We hear the explosions, yes, and tanks, but our fighters are defending Jabalia, the cradle of the revolution, as it has always been known, he said via chat app. In Rafah, the city in southernmost Gaza, where more than 1 million Palestinians are sheltering from fighting elsewhere, troops continue to operate in the eastern Al-Shalam, Salam and Janina neighborhoods and also in southeast, residents said. They said troops and tanks were trying to move towards the center of Rafah but were being met with heavy resistance from Hamas-led gunmen. Israel said its troops began targeting a Hamas training compound in eastern Rafah, killing militants in close quarters combat and finding large amounts of weapons and equipment intended to simulate that of the Israeli Defense Forces. It said earlier that a soldier had been killed in combat in the southern Gaza Strip on Tuesday. A reporter for public broadcaster Khan said this was the first military facility in Rafah since the start of the ground offensive operation there last week. Israel has ordered civilians to evacuate parts of Rafah, and UNRWA, the main United Nations aid agency in Gaza, estimates some humanitarian organizations to reach people across the Gaza Strip, the agency said on X. Jordan has foiled the suspected Iranian-led plot to smuggle weapons into the U.S. allied kingdom to help opponents of the ruling monarchy carry out acts of sabotage, according to two Jordanian sources with knowledge on the matter. The weapons were sent by Iranian-backed militias in Syria to a cell of the Muslim Brotherhood in Jordan that has links to the military wing of Palestinian group Hamas, he said. The catch was seized when members of the cell, Jordanians of Palestinian descent, were arrested in late March, they said. The alleged plot and arrest, reported there for the first time, come at a time of sky-high tensions in the Middle East, with an American-backed Israel at war in Gaza with Hamas, part of Iran's axis of resistance network of proxy groups built up over decades to oppose Israel. The two Jordanian sources who requested anonymity to discuss security matters declined to say what acts of sabotage were allegedly being planned, citing ongoing investigations and covert operations. They said the plot's aim was to destabilize it hosts a U.S. military base and shares borders with Israel, as well as Syria and Iraq, both home to Iranian-backed militias. The sources didn't specify what weapons were seized in the March raid, though said in recent months security services have thwarted numerous attempts by Iran and its allied groups to smuggle in arms including Claymore mines, C4 and Semtex explosives, Kalashnikov rifles and 107mm Katyusha rockets. Most of the clandestine flow of arms into the country has been bound for the neighboring Israeli occurs. However, some of the weapons, including those seized in March, were intended for use in Jordan by the Brotherhood cell allied to Hamas militants, they said. They hide these weapons in pits called dead spots. They take their location via GPS and photograph their location and then instruct men to retrieve them from there, said one of the sources. An official with knowledge of security matters, referring to the modus operandi of the smugglers. The Muslim Brotherhood is a transnational Islamist movement of which Hamas is an offshoot founded in the 1980s. The movement says it does not advocate violence, and Jordan's Brotherhood has operated legally in the kingdom for decades. Jordanian authorities believe Iran and its allied groups like Hamas and Lebanon's Hezbollah are trying to recruit young radical members of the kingdom's Brotherhood to their anti-Israel, anti-U.S. cause in a bid to expand the Tehran's regional network of allied forces, according to the two sources. A senior representative of Jordan's Muslim Brotherhood confirmed that some of its members were arrested in March in possession of weapons, but said whatever they did was not approved by the group and that he suspected they were smuggling arms to the West Bank rather than planning acts in Jordan. There is dialogue between the Brotherhood and the authorities. They know if there are mistakes, it is not the MB, only individuals, and not MB policy, said the representative, asking not to be named due to the sensitivity of the matter. Another senior figure in Brotherhood, who also requested anonymity, Palestinian group's operations in the West Bank from exile in Lebanon. Harari was killed by a drone strike in Beirut in January in an attack widely attributed to Israel. Spokespeople for the Jordanian government and the U.S. Department of Defense declined to comment for this article, while the Iranian Foreign Ministry wasn't immediately available. Israeli officials from the Prime Minister's office and Foreign Ministry didn't immediately respond to requests for comment. Over the past year, Jordan has said it has foiled many attempts by infiltrators linked to pro-Iranian militias in East Syria, who it says have crossed its borders with rockets, launchers, and explosives, adding that some of the weapons managed to get through undetected. Iran has denied being behind such attempts. The United Nations has launched an investigation into an unidentified strike on a UN car in Rafah on Monday that killed its first international staff in Gaza since October 7, a spokesperson for the UN Secretary General said. A staffer, a retired Indian in Gaza, where more than 1 million people had sought shelter, and its forces pounded the enclave's north on Tuesday in some of the fiercest attacks in months. Israel's international allies and aid groups have repeatedly warned against the ground incursion into Rafah, where many Palestinians fled, and Israel says 4 Hamas battalions are holed up. Israel says it must root out the remaining fighters. In a statement on Monday after Kill's death, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres reiterated an urgent appeal for an immediate humanitarian ceasefire and for the release of all hostages, saying the conflict in Gaza was continuing to take a heavy toll not only on civilians but also on humanitarian workers. Palestinian health authorities say Israel's ground and air campaign in Gaza since October 7 has killed more than 35,000 people and driven most of the enclave's 2.3 million people from their homes. On Tuesday, the UN Secretary General's deputy spokesperson, Farhan Haq, said the UN had set up a fact-finding panel to determine the responsibility for the attack. It is very early in the investigation, and details of the incident are still being verified with the Israeli Defense Force, he said. There are 71 international UN staff members in Gaza currently, he said. Israel, which launched its Gaza operation after an attack on October 7 by Hamas-led gunmen who killed some 1,200 people and took more than 250 hostages, according to its tallies, has ordered civilians to evacuate parts of Rafah, the main United Nations aid agency in Gaza. UNRWA estimates some 450,000 people have fled the city since May 6th. More than 1 million civilians have sought refuge there. The Israeli army released drone footage showing armed men standing next to UN-marked vehicles at a United Nations compound in the southern Gaza city of Rafah and called on the United Nations to investigate. An IDF statement said that on Saturday, troops had identified fighters in the central logistic compound of the UN Palestinian Relief Agency, UNRWA, east of Rafah, where the Israeli military has been operating for more than a week. And a UNRWA spokesperson said the agency was examining the footage and would share information once it became available. The footage was located by matching nearby buildings, poles, railings, tanks on a roof, and greenery to satellite and file images, but was not able to verify the date it was filmed or the identity of the armed men. UNRWA has been the target of fierce criticism by Israel, which accuses the agency of cooperating with Islamist movement Hamas in Gaza and has called for it to be disbanded. The agency set up to help Palestinian refugees displaced during the war that broke out around the time of the creation of the State of Israel in 1948 strongly denies the accusations. Israeli military spokesman Rear Admiral Daniel Hagari said the army had forwarded the footage to senior members of the international community and called on the UN to investigate the connection between UNRWA logistics centers and what he described as Hamas operatives near their vehicles. Israeli criticism of UNRWA has intensified at a time of growing international pressure on Israel to step up relief supplies into Gaza to ease a humanitarian crisis that threatens severe hunger to hundreds of thousands displaced by the war. Israel says it is ready to allow unlimited humanitarian supplies into Gaza and blames UN relief agencies and other international bodies for failing to distribute the aid properly. UN relief agencies say aid distribution in Gaza has been severely curtailed by fighting and have accused Israel of restricting access to the enclave despite famine warnings. Thousands of flag-waving Palestinians marched in northern Israel on Tuesday to commemorate the flight and forced flight of Palestinians during the 1948 war surrounding Israel's creation and to demand the right of refugees to return. Many of the about 3,000 people also called for an end to the war in Gaza as they took part in the march near the city of Haifa, marking the Nakba, or catastrophe, when hundreds of thousands of Palestinians fled or were driven out during the 1948 war that accompanied Israel's creation. Many held the Palestinian flags and wore keffiyeh headscarves during the annual return march, a rare Palestinian demonstration permitted to go ahead in Israel as the war in Gaza Strip rages on. Many clutched water bottles and some pushed strollers as they marched along a dirt path. Bands on the flag because of its red, green and black colors. Others called for Palestinians to be freed from Israeli occupation. This is part of our liberation, said Fida Shihadeh, coordinator of the Women Against Weapons Coalition and former member of the lead municipality council. It is not only about ending the occupation, but also about allowing all refugees the ability to return to the homeland. Some 700,000 Palestinians left or were forced to flee their homes during the 1948 war. Shehadeh said her family was forcibly displaced from the coastal village of Majdal Ascalon, with some fleeing to the city of Lead. In Israel began its offensive in Gaza, which is governed by Hamas, after the October 7 raid led by gunmen from the Islamist militant group, in which 1,200 people were killed in Israel and 253 abducted, according to Israeli tallies. Singapore will inaugurate Lawrence Wong on Wednesday as its new prime minister and fourth leader since independence 6 decades ago, completing a carefully calibrated power transfer designed to guarantee continuity in the wealthy city-state. Wong, 51, comes from among a crop of so-called 4G leaders, a new generation of politicians handpicked by the long-ruling People's Action Party to take over the reins of the key Asian trade and financial center. Wong will retain his current position as finance minister and takes charge of a country led for 2 decades by Lee Hsien Loong, the 72-year-old son of Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of modern Singapore, who stayed in politics until his death in 2015. The succession has been long coming, with Lee's plans of stepping down before he turned 70 upended by the pandemic and by a transition fumble when his anointed successor unexpectedly ruled himself out of the running. Wong's inauguration will take place on Wednesday evening. When the date for the handover was announced last month, Wong said he accepted the responsibility with humility and a deep sense of duty towards Singapore and its 5.9 million people. Every ounce of my energy shall be devoted to the service of our country and our people, Wong pledged in a video on his social media accounts. From 58 reported in the morning. A video shared by the National Disaster Management Agency, BNPP, showed logs, rocks and mud strewn over roads, collapsed bridges and houses in Tanah Datar, one of the 3 districts in West Sumatra hit by the floods. The disaster struck the area on Saturday evening when the heavy rains unleashed flash floods, landslides and cold lava flow, a mud-like mixture of volcanic ash, rock, debris and water. The cold lava flow came from Mount Merapi, one of Sumatra's most active volcanoes. Its eruption in December killed more than 20 people and more eruptions have followed since. BNPP will continue to search for the missing people and clean the main roads. Its head Suharanto said in a statement on Wednesday. Sisters Fitrawanis, 64, and Nubaiti, 66, watched in tears the ruins of their brother's house in Tanah Datar. They said the brother, Rasdi, 60, was still missing after water swept him away when he tried to save his mother-in-law. I hope that his body can be found quickly, either alive or dead, Fitrawanis said. She said both in-laws and Rizdi's wife have been found dead. At least 249 houses, 225 hectares of land, including rice fields, 19 bridges, and most of main roads were damaged in 3 districts and 1 town. Indonesia's meteorology agency, BMK, said it planned to try to mitigate heavy rainfall expected for the next week in West Sumatra by cloud seeding to prevent rains in the worst affected areas. Widely used in Indonesia, cloud seeding involves shooting salt flares into clouds to trigger rainfall in dry areas. A helicopter used by the Afghan Air Force crashed as it attempted an emergency landing in central Afghanistan on Wednesday, killing 1 person and injuring 12, the Defense Ministry said. The Mi-17 aircraft encountered technical issues as it attempted to recover the bodies of people who had fallen into a river in the central Ghor province, Afghanistan's Taliban-run Ministry of National Defense said in a statement. The helicopter crashed as it attempted an emergency in Afghanistan after the withdrawal of U.S.-led foreign forces in 2021 and inherited a number of aircraft from the forces of the Republican regime it toppled. It is not clear how many aircraft and what types of the Taliban have managed. You are watching the international news on Atlantic Television Network. We will be back after this break.
Every day our lives are changed by history.